Okay, our Drupal site has now installed, and now it's time for us to set up basic configuration settings for the site before we move on to start working with customizations and making this the site that we're working on. The first step is to fill in site information. So I'm going to come up here to the site information section, and I'm going to look first at site name. Site name is for what this site is for. So if your company is called Green Tomatoes, site name would not be Green Tomatoes website, but rather simply Green Tomatoes. In this case, we're building a site for an imaginary company called Tasty Cakes for All. Tasty Cakes for All is a company that will provide workshops on methods for creating treats with consideration for food allergies and sensitivities. It will also provide a database of recipes that is contributed to by invited individuals who might have valuable recipes to share. This will allow us, over the course of these videos, to explore a lot of the functionality that is possible within Drupal and makes Drupal such a wonderful tool, especially if you need a highly customized site. For now, however, I will simply add Tasty Cakes for All. The site email address is a system email address. It's not your email address. And this is really important to keep in mind. You don't want your personal email address to be the address that the site uses when it needs to send a password reset email to a user who forgot their password, or if it sends out automated messages, should you have rules, which we'll also talk about in another video, that have emails sent out at certain points in time when things happen on the site. This email address, you're going to choose something generic, and this is very important as well, and is in the help text right under site email address. It will use the same domain name that your website has. So your email address would be communications@tastykakesforall.com if your website were tastykakesforall.com, not tastycakesadmin@gmail.com. By making sure that these match, you're helping yourself stay out of people's spam boxes. One of the key flags that a lot of ISPs look for to determine if something is spam is if the origin domain and the email address domain don't match. And you definitely don't want your content, your emails to be flagged as spam. So I'm going to add into site email address an email that has the same domain as this imaginary site that we're creating. The site maintenance account is a critical user on the site. It's what we call user one. User one will always be the all-powerful account on your site. This is the user that can truly do anything, including serious harm to your site. In the chapter on Drupal users, we will talk more about user one. For the purposes of this course, we will be using user one for the majority of the demonstrations. However, it's really important for me to point out here that this is not best practice. You do not want to use your user one account to work on your site. For now, we will continue using the user one account. We'll talk about this further, and you will have an idea of what best practice actually will be for the sites that you build. The other thing to note about the user one account is that it should not be you, even if you think that you are the only person who will ever manage this site. Remember that things change. You may, for example, invite another person to be an administrator on your site, or you may leave whatever company you're building the site for and someone else may take over. You definitely don't want this user account to be tied to you as an individual, because then you will be enmeshed in the site in ways that aren't necessarily helpful to you. It's also a good idea that this user account does not have the username admin. And the reason why this is not a good idea is because this is the most likely username that the user one account will be on any content management site. And so it's the one that hackers will try if they're attempting to get into your site. So you'll want to come up with something unique that can't necessarily be guessed with ease. So in this case, I'm putting in TC4A, or Tasty Cakes for All. And the password that I'm going to use here for the purposes of demonstration is password, but you'll want to make sure that your password is a good one. The nice thing about this installer is that Drupal tells you the quality of your user password. For your user one account, make sure that the password strength that you get in this indicator is strong. There's an email address field as well, and you'll notice that by default, the email address that I put in for the site address has filled into the email address field here. But this isn't actually what we want. This is the email address that will be used if you forget the user one account password and need to have a password reset sent to you. So this email address needs to be one that you're actually going to use and that makes sense with the admin account. So I'm putting in siteadmin@tastycakesforall.com. Okay, moving on to the final settings here, regional settings. All of the information that you set up in this configuration pane is changeable later on. So if you need to change the email address, if you want to change the site name, if you want to change the username or password for the user one account, all of this is easily doable at a later point in time. Regional settings is also changeable later on. However, it's the one section in here that you really want to get right when you first install your Drupal site. And the reason for this is because if you have any content on your site that is date or time sensitive, you'll want to make sure that the dates and times on that content are in the region that your site events will actually be within. If you change your regional settings after date and time content has been created, it is possible that your configuration will become a little bit messy and you'll have to go back and troubleshoot and make sure that things actually line up the way that you need them to. So in this case, I'm going to set the default country to the United States, and the default time zone is already set to America, Los Angeles, because it has a sense of where I am. The final settings on this particular screen are update notifications, which can also be changed later on in this process if you change your mind or if you go to production and want these settings to be different. Drupal is a content management system with a database and user accounts that allow human beings to authenticate and make changes to the site. As such, there is an inherent security risk. And so the best practice is that you make sure that your site, that your code is always up to date, especially when security updates are released. I will continue to mention best practices throughout this course, and you will want to take note of what those best practices are and make them part of your standard workflow on every Drupal site that you do. The Drupal site is superb at identifying and patching security risks. So by keeping your code up to date and paying attention to the security updates that are available, you will have the best chance of having a very secure site. We're going to leave these options checked, check for updates automatically, and receive email notifications. Those email notifications will go to the email address that's set up for the user one account. So this email address right here. I want to point out here that many developers opt not to check for updates automatically on production sites. And this is done for performance reasons. These developers will always have another method of knowing when updates are required and available, and they will be able to keep their sites up to date. And it's really important that if you choose not to have updates checked automatically or the notifications sent to you by email, that you have another method and are ensuring that your site is up to date. And now I'm going to click Save and Continue. This is going to take a moment to set all of those settings in the database. And here we are. We have a notice here that says, "Congratulations, you installed Drupal." We're automatically taken to the home page of our new site. We have a link to add content. And at the very top of the site, we have a black bar and a gray bar, which give us access to all kinds of site configuration tools. These are available to us because we are logged in as the user one account, which in this case is TC4A, and this account can do anything it wants on the site. So to recap here, we have used the Drupal installer to walk through all of the steps required to set up an out-of-the-box Drupal site. On the site configuration screen, all of the choices that we've made can be changed later on, with the exception of the creation of the user one account. We can still change the email address and the username of that account if needed. We've also set our regional settings and our time zone and made sure that those are correct because changing those later on could wreak havoc on our site, and we don't really want to go through that. Also, if you do not keep update notifications enabled, make sure that you have another method of knowing when your Drupal site requires security updates. Otherwise, you might become behind in your security updates and your site could be at risk.